Hey you all, Farmer Jesse here. I'm going to talk in today's video about living pathways. I know I've kind of talked about them in every video I've shot, but this one is special because I'm really going to kind of dive into our experience so far with living pathways over the last couple of years, and especially like now that we've expanded it quite a bit, and how, I'm going to talk about where they make sense, in terms of your context. I'm going to talk about managing them, and I'm going to talk about whether you should sow a specific pathway crop or if you should just kind of leave it, whatever it is. So let's do it. First things first, if you're not subscribed to this channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And if you are subscribed, you're awesome. So here's the thing, living pathways. You can see I've got some mulched pathways. I've got some non-mulched, just regular cultivation pathways, and then lots and lots of living pathways. The thing with the living pathways is that they may or may not make sense in your context. So I kind of want to talk about this first. Our context is really important, and I should probably do this in every video, and I sometimes forget, but our context is we are in central Kentucky, the United States, where 6B is our agricultural climate, is our hardiness zone. We get about 150 frost-free days, but we get a lot of rain. We get like 50 inches on average every year. A couple years ago, we got 70. Right now, it's like mid-May or late May. We've had roughly 20 inches of rain. We get a lot of rain. So we have an abundance of moisture, and oftentimes we have too much, like I talked about in that drainage video I just did, in a way that we need to utilize or move that water out. And sometimes living pathways work really well for that. But if you're in a climate that does not have that much rain, like if you're only getting 25 inches of rain per year or something, that's an arbitrary number, and you don't have a lot of extra water, like you don't have a giant pond or anything to irrigate from, I'm not going to recommend living pathways. Sorry, it's just not maybe a good idea. The living pathways are really great when you do have an abundance of moisture, and we do for most of the year. We always go through like a 2-month period where it can be really dry some years, but generally speaking, we have an abundance of moisture. And we have an abundance of water in Kentucky. It's affordable, it's, abundant. It's not as big of a deal here. Another really common question when it comes to living pathways is what we put in them. For us personally, we just left whatever native grasses were here and oversowed that with red and white clover. I don't know if that's the best approach, but our experience has been, even when we sow it to something we want, we had some in some clovers last year, nature kind of chooses anyway. And this is actually something I talked to Helen Attow about. She, at Woodleaf Farm, in Montana, she was doing, I think 2 or 3 acres of strip tillage, and she had living pathways and that she would mow. And I think they started out in red clover and they ended up being something like mallow. And she was like, I wasn't really worried about it because it, that was something that was helping my soil, and mallow does gather nutrients and gathers, I think it was nitrogen that it was gathered on like a really amazing level. But she wasn't really worried about what was actually in the pathways, as long as it was just under control. So in our case, like if we had Bermuda grass or something, that may be more more concern, but for the most part, like I've seen some crabgrass and that sort of thing, and we'll talk about edging in a minute, which is how you kind of keep that under control. But what's going to kind of determine what's in your pathway is how you mow it, like how often you manage it. Like if you let your clover get pretty tall, then you may not have to mow it as much, and you may not get as much weed competition from grasses and those sorts of things. But for us, we're mowing it relatively regularly because we're harvesting relatively regularly. So so for us, we're just cool with letting nature kind of decide what's going to be there. That said, I do think there's some really cool opportunities and options that you could use for pathways, maybe like creeping thyme. I know that I talked to Richard Perkins on the podcast about chamomile in the pathways. He said he saw some chamomile pathways, and chamomile's like kind of a difficult one to germinate and stuff, but that would be super cool. So there are options and opportunities. Like if your soil is really lacking in nitrogen or something, maybe more legumes and that sort of thing would make more sense. But yeah, like I said, in our experience, it kind of doesn't really matter what we choose. Nature's going to kind of just decide for us. And I want to make sure and give a special shout out to Jenny Love of Love and Fresh Flowers, who did the No-Till Flowers podcast. She's the one that really inspired me to go for it on the living pathways, because she does it on several of her flower beds, and I was really inspired by that. So we kind of went for it. One of our two biggest questions were like, how do you manage them week to week? And then what do you do about the edges? Because that's like the other big question we get is like, how do you keep the weeds or the grasses or whatever from creeping? And so far I have some ideas for that. Now I'm going to tell you what mower we use, but I'm not going to say go out and buy that mower, because I think there needs to be a tool specifically for this job designed, and it's not the mower that I use. The mower I use is really good, but it's a little bit expensive, and it really only has one job. And when a tool only has one job, it's not a great tool. So the tool that we're using, the mower that we're using, is a 60-volt, 17-inch Greenworks mower. And so it's an electric mower, works really well. It's surprisingly powerful. We're mowing every 10 days or so with it. So our pathways are not 17 inches, they're 18 inches. So there is like a little bit of go back and forth. So we've learned that we just go down one side and then come back the other, and that gets a full clipping on our pathways. You don't want any sort of mower that's gonna spit the stuff off to the side, because you don't want it in your lettuce mix. You don't want to get on your beds necessarily. There is some advantage to that, but that's like a whole other video. Look at the work that Helen Attow and Carl Rosado did on that, on putting fresh clippings into their beds is really interesting. But generally, you want that to either be collected. You could collect it in a collector, or just have it be like a mulching mower and put it straight down, so a flail mower, or in this case, it's just like mulches out the back. So we could collect it if we wanted to, but we're just leaving it on the ground to kind of help with moisture retention. Now, the edges are a little bit more complicated. I think that the tool that we're using right now is a stirrup hoe. I've also been playing around with this like single blade thing from Haas. I really think it's cool. It could use like a prong on the end to kind of help to pluck out weeds as you go, but there's some potential there. I think the stirrup hoe is nice just because it clips right along the edge of the bed really well if you keep it nice and sharp. But it is extra work, so it's kind of figuring out how to do that efficiently so that you're not wasting a bunch of time is a little bit of a challenge. And the tool that I think we need for this to really work is an 18-inch flail mower with a edger on each side. So that way you make one pass, you get your edges and your bed all at once. If you're a tool maker, do that please, and then send me one, because that would be awesome. But that, maybe even like on a tilther drill or something, something simple, but it could just go down the middle of the beds, cut the pathways, and then edge the beds. That way you're keeping your rhizomatous grasses that are really only growing like half an inch or so below the surface. You're keeping those under control, and you're also but you're kind of retaining some of the benefits of having the living pathways, which would be like, in our case, using some of that extra moisture, using and releasing it. It would also be gathering nutrients, keeping the soil in place. It's really nice to walk on. It's really clean. It feels good on your feet. I'm not going to show you a picture of my feet, but it feels good on your feet. It's aesthetically amazing. Like, just look at how green this place is. I love that. Hannah and I just sit out here and geek out at how like beautiful and lush this place feels right now. But yeah, they're gathering nutrients so that in theory your plants could access those, photosynthesizing, you know, having their own little carbon cycle right there next to the plants. I think it's cool. I think it's got potential. Now, some things I foresee, and some things I'll probably do videos about later on, is managing a few things. One is the any sort of row cover. Like, if you put a row cover right on living pathways, it's going to grow through the living pathway, or it's going to really grow under the living pathway. That can be kind of a mess. So we're still trying to figure out how to manage that a little better. Droughts. If we do get a drought and we have all this, you know, all these plants that need water, do we water extra, or do we try and just go over those with mulch? My thing right now is using maybe a combination of wood chips or something and kind of mulching over top of them to help with moisture retention. I also, in the spring, ill-advisedly, because I didn't realize how bad our drainage was, in this one plot I put rotten hay right over top of the living pathways. So the living pathways died. The hay kind of took over, and now the living pathways are coming back through it, you know, in grasses or whatever. And I think that flexibility is kind of an interesting idea that, you know, I'm not worried about, like, if for some reason I want to tarp this, which I'm getting away from tarps, but let's say I wanted to, then it would kill the living pathways, but then I would just resow them or let them grow back. So there's a lot of potential in just like being flexible with them, you know, but the moisture retention, I think, is going to be a bit of a question mark. And like I said, moving those any sort of cover, any sort of insect protection or frost protection out of the way, out of the pathways, that's also, yeah, a big question mark for us. And we, of course, will still have lots to learn. So let me know any questions you have. Let me know any thoughts you have, any experiences you have. This is where we're at on them. I'm fully into it, but like I said, your context is important. Your management, I think you should decide what your management's going to be before you establish your pathways, because 17 and 18-inch mowers are not easy to find. You may want, until we get that tool invented by somebody, you know, to think about 21-inch pathways. It should be a lot bigger, but you know, there are a lot more 20 and 21-inch mowers than there are 17 and 18-inch mowers. The real mowers, you could try that. Those are just push non-gas mowers. You know, if you have a good level surface. Ours is like a wave So it's not really great for anything that can't mow on uneven surfaces. In fact, I contacted somebody about a really expensive mower early on, and they were like, yeah, it's not gonna work. So anyway, let me know any questions you have. Like this video if you like this video. Make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Other than that, you all, we'll see you later. Thanks for watching. Bye. This thing even kind of level? There we go. This is filming on a hillside. I think I broke it.